Hello, everyone. I know that Europe is a digital momentum. The proof is that I didn't know TechBBQ was ever existing for 7 years. That's quite amazing. Now, I will be talking about turning the European AI gap into leadership. Now, my name is Jacques. I'm a senior partner in McKinsey. I've been 28 years in McKinsey, and you can wonder why somebody 50 years old in consulting will be talking to you about closing that kind of gap. Well, the reason is that as a firm, we actually have moved dramatically into digital technologies. We have more than 4,000 employees in what we call digital and analytics. We basically bought a company called Quantum Black, and we have one of the best strategic partnership with a company called Element AI. So we know what we're talking about, and myself, I have invested significantly in small startup. So I'm extremely interested in this topic because, again, from a momentum point of view, today, if you take the skill that we need for AI to thrive in Europe, we're pretty much ahead of the US. We pretty much have a workforce in terms of scalability that is growing at 4 to 5% a year, quite good as a momentum. And on top of that, indeed, finally, venture capitalists and money is flowing into the game, up to 21% higher than it was last year. But having a momentum is key, but do we have enough to close the gap? And statistics help in the sense that today, indeed, we're still pretty flat in terms of total startup that is really taking share in the marketplace. We pretty much has a flat R&D intensity, and when we got some R&D that is basically keeping up, is possibly in the wrong place. So if you take ICT, we pretty much get leadership much more on the hardware side and the software side. And if you look, let's say, at pharmaceuticals, we pretty much have investment in R&D in the old classical pharmacos instead of possibly biotechnologies or any omic fields that you can imagine, like genomics. So indeed, we should possibly do something else. So I'm going to be talking about the gap, because at the end of the day, we need to know what gap we want to actually close. Why it matters, and it matters not only because possibly as a small startup, you want to make money, but to make money, you need a market for that. And then I will simply look back and say, if there are one thing that we could do together, what is the way that we can actually start to close the gap? Now, sizing the gap. I told you so. We all know that if you look today in terms of the spending, which is devoted to artificial intelligence and frontier technologies, we're pretty much squeezed between the US and China, and China is leading. Looking back even from a point of view of not input but output, and take the perspective of, let's say, just the patent side, whether you talk about artificial intelligence or the next wave of quantum computing that will allow this artificial intelligence to thrive, we're pretty much not at the fair sides of what we should be. We should be pretty much at 50-50, and you are in fact much more in the 30-40% versus the US. Now, what is less known is that if you want AI to thrive and get economic impact such that VC will flow and possibly fund you, you need obviously the demand side to buy your products and buy your services, i.e. are incumbents, large corporates and normal corporates actually investing and digesting these technologies. In fact, when you look at the waves, pretty much quite a surprising thing, we still yet to have companies fully using all the set of technologies that are basically labeled digital. And if you look at smart robotics, machine learnings and the like, barely 3 to 4% of all the companies we surveyed are actually using these technologies at scale across all functions of the organization. And obviously, if this 3%, pretty much half, if not more than that, are likely to be digital native companies, not the old ones that we have. The second point is that if you look at that and translate that into, does that actually translate into potential revenue or profit, in this case it's revenue, we come to an interesting point, which is that today, in a classical yearly cycle, and you look at the revenue flow, in the United States, give and take, you take a pro forma industry, 62% of the revenue is coming from what I would call the old world, analog, and pretty much 38% is coming from digital type. That's the left-hand side of this slide. Europe is still at 72%, 28. Now, if you look back at the right-hand side of the slide, and I'm looking at this from the perspective of AI, and it's possibly difficult to see in the colors, and maybe it's not visible that much in the colors, but pretty much today, already 9% of the total revenue is actually driven by technology on the AI type in the US, while it's barely 3 to 5% only in Europe. So today, not only the technologies are not ingested, but in the same times, they are not making the revenue game that we see in the US. Bottom line, if the gap was about 20% with the US in the first wave of digital technologies, it's actually already 30% today when it comes to AI. So not only the catch-up is necessary, but you see that the gap is actually increasing. Now, going to the second point, why it matters. Now you can say, look, it matters because I want to sell my products if I'm an AI startup. But we look at it from a perspective of the total economy. And for an economy to thrive, to get people to get paid, you need productivity increase. When we look at this technology and look how the channels by which they will actually create productivity, give and take, there will be a supply side element, which is the productivity layer. 25% uplift in the next 15 years of the GDP of Europe could be linked to this technology. Quite staggering number. It's pretty much close to 1% of GDP growth per year, pretty much twice as much as the classical digital technologies, and pretty much 3 times as much as what the first wave of the PC ICT of the 1980s has delivered in terms of productivity growth. Now, on top of that, you get a productivity growth. That productivity growth increase your wage, your profit pool, which at the end of the day, you respend in the economy. So you get a demand side effect. If you add the demand side effect, the 25% become a 33 up to 35%. And in total, if you take all the costs to make it happen, it's still a 25% net. So the first thing I want to make is that it's necessary to do that because Europe has a catch-up to do on the US, not only on digital technologies, but these digital technologies create the productivity uplift for all of us to get rich and possibly get the demand side on your side. Now, the second point, which is possibly not very well known, is that for all the data that you've seen, for the first time, AI is the technology that scale everything that possibly you have looked at in terms of digital technologies. You automate things, so most of the time you can scale much faster in terms of the supply chain, the business model that you have. And if you do that, you can easily discriminate between firms that are using these technologies and those who don't. And in fact, we look at that, and most of the time companies tell us, in fact, 50% of the case, they will invest in this technology simply because they're afraid to be left over. The competitive effect is actually quite strong. So expect this market to be quite buoyant simply because it's a sorting effect between very good companies and actually not that good companies. And in fact, here's the myth. The myth has been, you know what? We don't want too much of these AI technologies in society simply because not only it's possibly interesting, but these companies are actually scaling smart capital for less employment. In fact, we look at that, and it's a bit of a myth. And the myth is that the faster you go and the more scalable you are in AI, which is what you have on the bottom of these slides, the better the employment prospects of your industry and countries, in this case Denmark, could be. In fact, there is a positive relationship. You can wonder why. Obviously, technology kills jobs, but always create new type of jobs, possibly yours. And on top of that, as I said, when you got productivity, you got wealth, and wealth is usually consumed. And when you consume, you need possibly more people to engage into employment. So it's important to say we want to have it not because we want possibly AI startup to scale, but because at the end of the day, it's very important for society to have the productivity that we need. So how do we regain leadership? Now we look at that, and again, there are roughly 8 enablers. that really make a difference. And that's the combination of these eight that create the ecosystem of AI that will basically make Europe catch up with the US. Well, the first one is simply the industrial structure, the potential of some of the tasks that you do to be automated. That's typically ingrained in your industrial structure. Don't look too much on that. The second one is possibly most of you, the AI ecosystem. And today, if you look at the AI density per capita, it's still important to say we are pretty good in some countries, we are pretty good in some cities, but we are pretty much not catching up with the key dense areas of the US, like Silicon Valley. We are pretty much at 52% of the potential today if we look at the comparison with Silicon Valley of Boston. When we look at human skills, we get pretty good guy. In fact, when you look at one of the key strengths, if you look at the PISA score, especially in this part of Europe, Scandinavia, we're pretty much at the level of the best potential. We are pretty much at 90% on 100%, which is quite good. So we got the skills. Now we have to make sure these digital skills, these human skills are basically put to work. As I said, the availability of scientists and engineers that basically can actually deliver on the productization of AI technologies, it's actually not bad. It's 63% of the potential. So we are not necessarily excellent, but at least we see that we can do something. Innovation capabilities. Here's the trick. We don't invest in technology because we want to kill jobs. We invest in technologies because we want to innovate. Most of the case that you've seen before, it's all models where you innovate in terms of the business model or the innovation of the product and services that you want to do there. There as well, we have some issues. And we can continue on that. Now, difficult to read, but we ranked all the countries based on those things. And no wonder the US is pretty much on top. And no wonder as well, China is possibly not there yet because China still needs a bit more of the connectiveness on the world. It's still very much, the data flow are still very much US-centric, for instance. But we see the squeeze. And the squeeze is not happening because of money. The squeeze is happening across the 8 dimensions that I was talking about that makes the difference for the future of productivity led by AI. Denmark is not that bad. It's pretty much the second tier, above average. But where Denmark is possibly having a bit of potentials to push is that the innovation density versus many countries is still not there yet. The investment capabilities, please, venture capitalists, please put money into this country, is obviously quite important. And again, the AI startup density is possibly thriving, but it's not enough. So these are the 8 drivers that will make a difference. 5 observations possibly to finish if you want to play into the AI evangelist. The very first one is that the future of AI is more than technology. As I say, it's about scalability. You need social, emotional skills. You need obviously technical skills. You need digital skills. It's a major transformation on that side. It's all about ecosystem. Today, the top best companies in the world are all digital ecosystem. So it's really about not only you as an entrepreneur, but an ecosystem of entrepreneurship. The second point, as I said, is a massive transformation, not only in terms of the people, but also the industries. Point number 3, all these things will actually get the fate of what we call in the economic jargon, the solo paradox. Solo, as said, we see technologies everywhere, but not in the statistics. At the beginning of the end of the 90s, pretty much we've got the internet, we got the first wave of the PC. We don't see that in the statistics. The ICT value share was stuck at 4% of total GDP. People were wondering, where does it lie if there is so much of profit pool and excitement about these technologies? We will see the same with AI, simply because it takes time to transition and to diffuse. But it's very important because if you want to get to reap the benefit of your valuation and in terms of the revenue of the market, you need to stand there for quite a while. It's not a game of 3 years. It's a game of 10 to 15 years. Point number 4, we talk about those skills. Education is not fit for the AI revolution, for most of what we have said. And by the way, it's not about my kids. Obviously, there will be some change needed at that age. But it's going to be about my age, 50, 60. These people will need to be reskilled and basically put back into the workforce to cope with the AI revolution. And last but not least, you are the proof that some of you are sufficiently skilled and are sufficiently successful to scale the business. I close with one slide, which is, at the end of the day, there is always this debate, and Europe has been one of those, where we say, we don't have enough venture capitalists. Is it true, yes or no? We look at the data in very deep detail, and we look at the different inputs that make the secret sauce to get the output of startup in different countries. In fact, first observation, there are 3 blocks. And the 3 blocks, if they sum up above 1, that simply means that for €1 that you put, you got more than €1 that you get. That's called economies of scale. What you see, the economies of scale in AI is quite significant. It's 1.6, which means that every money that you put is a winner. And where is the money coming from, and what's the different distribution that you see across the globe? Pretty much 50% is indeed venture capital. Okay. The fact that you are a rich country that have the right infrastructure is 0.4, but look at the middle, 0.5. 0.5 is you, is the AI professionals or the people that basically get the digital capabilities to make this startup working. You see that very much on the right. You see that in Europe, Ireland, Sweden, Finland, UK, pretty much has already quite of the right mix and basically pulled themselves ahead in terms of the AI startup that we can get. Denmark is pretty much in the average of the zone, pretty much like Holland and possibly a bit like Germany. I'm Belgian, you see Belgium is much more on the side of these ones. But the message is very clear. We have a gap, we need to work on 8 dimensions, and one of those is actually not that AI will kill employment, is that the future of AI is the future of skill and the future of AI entrepreneurship like you. Thank you.